Today's topic, counting the collection. 1, 2, 3. Welcome to TABLEscraps, short discussions about board, card, and tabletop gaming, submitted by the viewing audience and discussed with the viewing audience. 283, 284. No, I'm just kidding. There's more to this episode than just that. Hey, welcome back to another episode of TABLEscraps. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, who, along with the live streaming YouTube chat, is going to discuss another topic about tabletop, board, and card gaming. And this topic, as all topics that we have, was submitted to us by a viewer. And today's topic comes to us from Jason, who says, when assessing a board game collection, do you count expansions as separate games, or do you only count base games? And what about expandalones, like Dominion Intrigue, expansions that can stand on their own as a separate game? Or do you just count the number of boxes that you need in order to store your games? Well, that is an excellent question there, Jason, and I think something that all of the people who collect a board game library seem to encounter at some point. Actually, I know that I did. So here is what my experience with that has been and the decision that I came to that I hope will be helpful to all of you. First of all, when I started tracking my collection, when I had just, I'd say, 20 games maybe, and I knew I was going to be collecting more as time went by and creating an entire board game library, sure enough, I did that very thing of tracking the base game and all the expansions and the expandalones and promos and anything I got, I would plug in to the Board Game Geek collection tool. And I found that within just a few months, it was a lot of work. So I personally made the conscious decision that what I do now is I actually removed all the expansions and everything out of my collection list. I actually removed them, even though I still own them. I removed all of those. And what I do is I just track the base games. So you're only tracking the base game, but you're still obtaining expansions theoretically. So what do you do when it comes to putting those expansions on your shelf? Do you keep the expansions in a separate box, which Jason and others have asked about? Or do you just dump all the expansions guts into the base games box and have that be on your shelf? Well, I also am of the club that does not keep the expansion in a separate box on the shelf. I dump its guts. I'm a guts dumper. I will dump the guts of the expansion into the base box, sometimes if there's room in an insert, or in small, nice baggies, and I will organize it that way, and I'll put the base game right onto the shelf with the expansion. Now, the next logical question then, which I'll answer, then we'll get to the live streaming chat's thoughts on this. The next logical question is, well, what happens when you are looking at your collection and all you see is the base games and you don't see the expansions anymore? And maybe there was a game that had an expansion that you thought about, and then several months later, since you're not tracking it in BGG, it's not on your shelf, and you don't remember, did I buy that expansion or not? What prevents you from buying duplicate copies of the same expansion since it's no longer in sight and in mind? Well, what I do is I actually, when it comes to expansions, I flip the tracking around. Instead of tracking the expansions I have, I just go to a certain website somewhere and I'll have a wish list of the expansions I want to get. So when an expansion is announced or becomes available for a game that has my interest, I'll add it to my wish list. Then when I get the expansion, I will take it off that wish list. So in the future, I'm like, did I get that expansion? Is it in this game? I know I had 3 expansions. I only got 2 of them. Which ones do I have? I can go and I check the wish list, and if it's on the wish list still, I know I haven't got it yet when that arises. That doesn't arise all the time. That doesn't happen often. But when it does, that is the methodology that I incorporate to prevent duplication of expansion acquisition. So now that you know my methods and why, and what goes into counting the collection, I only count the base games. I don't even bother counting expansions when I count my collection and determine how large my game library is. I just look at base games. Let's take all of this and get the YouTube chat's perspective on this and see what you guys are doing. Our first comment today comes from Gazensha, who says, counting boxes seems more useful than counting everything, since that correlates better to shelf space. Though on BGG, I track everything. So that is a lot of maintenance there, Gazensha. And I would like to know, do you also track promos? Because that was, to me, the straw that broke the camel up's back, is trying to track all the promos and everything. And that's when I realized I was just tracking too much. So I want to know, Gazensha, are there layers when we track everything? Are there still layers to what that everything entails? Toyota says, I add both my expansions and base games to BGG, but when I count games, I don't count the expansions, because some expansions are just, a few cards and not really a game, but I do count expandalones. Let's get back to this expandalones, because I did not touch on this. Jason gave the perfect example of a standalone of some of the large expansions for Dominion, like Intrigue. Games that are expansions can be plugged into the base game, but still can stand on their own. I may be in the minority here, but I don't even track expandalones in my collection stats or my boxes or anything. I don't. It still fits in that. Even if it's an expandalone, I usually find that I have the base game anyway, because if I like a game enough to invest in an expandalone, it's usually because I've played or have the base game. And I like it that much. An example of this for me would be Trains with the Rising Sun expansion. I've gutted Rising Sun and put it in the base game's box, but I don't even bother tracking Rising Sun because even though it's an expandalone, I still consider an expansion because it's my collection and my rules. So in my little universe of board game collectionness, that's the approach I've taken. But I do find it interesting with how people treat these expandalones, if we're going to try and hammer this word into the ground and make it a thing that we're going to start saying. I do find it interesting how people treat these expandalones, because some of them really do stand on their own as a solid separate game, and it does blur that line. But not enough for me. I got my glasses on, so that line is not as blurry to me. Thanks to the glasses, also not blurry, is the next comment, which again is from Gazensha, who follows up by saying that just one more follow-up here is, plus you never know when you need to drop boxes onto a bandicoot's head. Fair enough. Yeah. If not bandicoots, yesterday, I had to drop a box of magic cards onto an earwig's head. So board game droppage onto the heads of various creatures and animals is not necessarily as rare an occurrence as you may think. Bandicoot, earwig, or other. It's true. Let's continue on, though, to some non-Bandicoot topics discussions. Zachary says, if the expansion can't stand alone, then it's not another game. So, Zachary, are you saying if it's not another game, that means that it must not have its own separate box on the shelf and it must not be included in calculating your collection size? Or is it just saying that it goes into the core box but still can be tracked separately? How much of its own essence does a game that in that category fit then? I mean, is this something where we need to create a list of strict rules in that case? I think perhaps, Zachary, the real answer is I'm taking your comment a little too seriously. So let's continue on to the next comment and see what happens there. The City of Kings opens its doors to us with the comment, I think it depends on why you are counting and recording your collection. I like to have everything recorded so I can share with my friends and let them choose what they want to play. There you go, City O Kings. That is absolutely a viable reason for this, which actually brings a question, which perhaps we should ask to the audience. For those of you who do record and track your collection on BGG or other sites, why do you do it? Are you doing it to have a pick list for your games or game groups to pick from on game night to say, hey, I want to play this game, bring it? Or is it for your own bookkeeping to know what games that you have? Is it just fun to track stats? That's part of the reason why I do it. That is actually a good question. Why do we do it? And City of Kings, you make a good point here about having your list to share with your friends. That definitely makes sense. I wonder then, if you are specifically doing your list to share with your friends, are people in that situation more likely to track everything, every expansion and stuff like that? I'm thinking perhaps they are, but if you are in that boat, let me know how that affects how much of your collection you track. Let's continue on with a comment from Trevon, who says, if the expansion requires a shelf slot like Dominion, then track it. If it goes into the base box like Carcassonne, don't track it. Oh, Trevon, what a can of worms you have opened there. No, a can of earwigs, even nastier. Because there we run into a problem, don't we, Trevon? Because many games like Carcassonne, like you mentioned, have multiple expansions. And if you're coming into gaming after the game and its expansions have been out for a while, you're not necessarily going to be getting those expansions all in chronological order. So then the problem comes up. What if you get a game that has, like Carcassonne, multiple expansions? All of its expansions aren't necessarily going to fit in that box. So which expansions do you put in the base box, and which then do you put in a separate box? You can run into the problem of really having a confusing assortment of game boxes there to choose from, couldn't you? So, Trevon, I fret over your response because I'm not sure if that's going to lead to improved categorization and bookkeeping of one's collection, or actually cause more confusion. So Trevon, elaborate and teach me your ways and steer me in the right direction. Let's continue on to the next comment from Toyota, who makes a very good point in saying, I record everything I own for insurance purposes. There is an aspect of recording the collection and why that we haven't touched on, which makes sense. It is just having a written record of all of the games that you own. And I would imagine Toyota, in that case, you want to be very, very thorough in what you write down. I hear every now and then someone mentioning that on like a BGG forum or somewhere in a YouTube comment about tracking their collection for insurance purposes. Heaven forbid anyone's collection or family or anything that they own, not just their board games, because board games aren't the most important thing, but heaven forbid something happens where someone actually has to take advantage of that insurance they have. I'm curious, has anyone out there watching ever had to actually use their insurance policy to recoup the losses of losing a board game collection? I would be interested to know what happened. Did the insurance company understand the value of the board games? Was it like $5 per game that they ended up giving you, or like $2 per game? Did they go down to like the thrift store and check the prices of used games and say, well, this is worth $1.99. You had Descent and all its expansions. Here's $8. How did actually utilizing an insurance policy when it came to board games actually work? What happened? What was the result of that? I would love to know that information in detail in the comments below, or anyone else. Our next comment comes from Sasha, who says, track base games, track expansions separately, count standalone expansions as either a game or an expansions, but not both. Don't count multiple boxes of board games. Hello, LCGs. That's true, because like some LCGs, like the Arkham Horror LCG, the publisher says, fun tip, if you want to be able to make every potential deck that's legal for the game, buy 2 base sets. Thank you, board game publisher. That's exactly what we would rather do, rather than have all of the game, instead of have all of the cards that we need included in the base set of the game in the first place. Your checklist for how you do it makes logical sense there, and I can see why. And if board game publishers would just give us all of the cards that we need for the LCGs in the first place, it would streamline the tracking purpose. So there's another reason why that would be possibly a nice thing for them to do. But in the meantime, let's continue on to a question with hopefully a little bit less ranty response from Ethan, who says, I do keep track of all base games and expansions owned on BGG, but it does annoy me a bit because almost all expansions show up as unplayed. Logging expansion plays eludes me. Oh, thank you. I forgot about that. Yes, Ethan, you're right. That is one of the other things that caused me to change my mind, because I would have to go through my collection list when I was tracking what was being played, and I would have to remember, okay, we played this game and it has 3 expansions. Which expansions did we use? We used this one, but not that one. And going through and trying to track which expansion. It's like, do I just now track the expansion play only, but not track the base gameplay? Or do I track both? It became a real headache. So Ethan, you are not alone in your experience and frustration with that annoyance. And kudos to the people who can track that, because that adds a lot of extra maintenance to tracking the gameplays when you're tracking the expansions that were used along with the base game. So if you do that, let me know. Is it just that you take extra time, or do you have like a special app for that makes it easier? For those of you who do track absolutely everything when it comes to playing with expansions, including like who won and what the points were, I've seen people do that. Let me know in the comments below about how you pull that off with still finding time to like eat, because it seems like a lot of maintenance. Regandar says, I list everything that is a separate purchase as its own thing. I track stuff as a pick list, and so I can scare myself with an inordinate amount of money I've spent already. I will agree. Creating the wish lists and the tracking does sometimes help keep things in perspective. When you have a massive wish list or a massive list of what you've bought, sometimes like, you know what? Maybe I'll hold off until next month to invest in this new stuff, because I still have all of these things I just added to my list, and maybe I should just work on these that I've added before adding more to my list. So Ragandar, you make a very good point there with that one. And finally, let's go to GoGuard's comment, which is, I loathe some expansions, so consider them separate games when discussing games with others. Some friends shared a Google Doc, so we're not all buying the same games. There, we only list base games. Oh, that is a really good way to go, having a shared Google Doc with your game group. That is an excellent piece of advice. I'm glad that made it into the show. As for loathing some expansions, so you consider them separate games when discussing games with others, we're out of time in the chat, but in the YouTube comments below, if you float by this video when it comes by, when it's posted live, I would love to know which games have expansions that fit into that category for you, because it sounds like you have very strong opinions about certain ones. And I'd be really curious to see which ones do and which expansions don't fit in that category of loathing. So very curious. And I hope you found this discussion to be intriguing as well. And if you have other ideas that have been sparked in your imagination because of this conversation, you're more than welcome to share those thoughts with us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube comments below this video. And while you're on the comments, be sure to subscribe to Pair of Dice Paradise for more board game news, reviews, and commentary such as this. And before we go, I just wanted to put out a reminder that episodes like this have been made possible by viewers like you who have been supporting Pair of Dice Paradise's Pod Pledge fundraising campaign. It really does make a difference, and thank you so much to everybody that's been backing the project. But until next time, I've been Chaz Marler, who, along with the YouTube live streaming chat, have been serving up some table scraps. Thanks. Talk to you again soon. Because of some reasons I wrote down in my notes that are eluding me at the moment, but now that I see my notes, I can remember that I wrote that no, that's not what I wrote. Oh, I made a note that I should remember that, and I don't need to write it down. Thanks, me in the past. Good job.